Before the storm arrived and they were the ones beating on the veteran's door, they had scoffed at his odd steel shelter. The entire town made fun of a quiet veteran who, on a snowy Montana ridge, erected an odd, arched cottage with his faithful dog. However, every insult disappeared the night the deadliest blizzard in decades hit, to be replaced by frantic fists pleading for cover. This is the tale of how their only hope was a man they didn't trust. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments section below. The headlights of the bus pierced the thin layer of mountain fog that held on to the trees as it thundered into Timberline Valley shortly after daybreak. With his eyes focused on the wildness outside the window, Cole Harrison sat close to the back, his shoulders straightened out of habit. He appeared to be a guy who had been carved out of the road itself. He was slender and worn, and his memories weighed more than his bag. Ranger, the elderly dog that had accompanied him through far darker situations than these peaceful Montana hills, was at his feet. Cole's breathing tightened whenever the bus rocked too much, and the dog's ears twitched as he raised his head. The sandstorms persisted after 3 years of treatment. The screaming, the tunnels, the explosions. Cole had only learned how to walk with those spirits without tripping and falling because of them. In all its icy honesty, Montana seemed to be the only place he could still breathe without recoiling from the sound of battle. With Ranger near his leg, Cole got off the bus as it came to a stop in the narrow main street. A scatter of wooden storefronts, a petrol station with a peeling roof, and a diner where several residents drank their first cup of coffee of the day were all illuminated by the morning light. The village was framed like a cradle by the valley, jagged cliffs, towering pines, and a sky so vast it seemed as though it could contain a wounded man. With his tail low but vigilant, Ranger sniffed the air and scanned the silent street with the same methodical caution he had learned in Hellman, far away. With a familiar sensation, Cole put a hand on the dog's back, relieving a tight spot in his chest. Simple. Boy, Cole muttered. Remember a fresh start? However, the town gave him a tight, uncomfortable look in return. Outside the hardware store, a man wearing an apron stopped mid-scan, his eyes narrowing. At the diner window, 2 elderly women leaned very close to one another and spoke in a blunt whisper. A younger man beside the gas pump stood up straight, hands on his hips, and looked up and down at Cole as if he was unsure if he was witnessing danger or a neighbor. Cole sensed it right away. The change in atmosphere, the critical quiet. It was nothing new. He had witnessed it in waiting areas, supermarkets, and airports. He had hoped a little town may be different, but he saw the expression that screamed, war broke him. Something's off about that one. He was mistaken. Ranger stepped forward and brushed against Cole's calf in a silent gesture of encouragement as Cole raised his duffel over his shoulder. Once, the dog had saved his life by pulling him out of the mud following the explosion. Even though he was bleeding and confused, Cole had worked valiantly to adopt him following his release in exchange. They were their unit's final 2 survivors. It was impossible for one to leave without the other. Cole wanted to get instructions to the property he had bought, a desolate area on North Cliff Ridge, so he crossed the street in the direction of the general store. He sensed that people were watching him, evaluating him, and making assumptions. As he entered, a bell jingled. The shop smelled of dust, old newspapers, and cedar. A tall man with weary eyes and an overly tight jaw stood behind the counter. "Help you?" said the man. Not unkind, but not welcoming either. "I'm looking for North Cliff Ridge," Cole replied. The man blinked slowly as memory dawned. "Bought a parcel up there. Need to know which road splits toward it." He grunted a little and said, "You're the one who bought the old Haggerty property?" He didn't believe that land would ever be touched again. Cole nodded politely. "You'll get it," the man whispered. I like quiet." The hesitancy in his voice wasn't an accident. "Storms, too. Wind up there will peel the skin off a man. Hope you're stable enough for it." Despite feeling the jab, Cole's face remained expressionless. Cole stiffened as Ranger stepped forward, putting himself just ahead of him as though to warn him, "Watch your tone." Cole let out a slow breath. The clerk, being cautious not to approach Ranger, gestured rigidly at a map that was affixed to the wall and said, "Just need the directions." Cole researched the route and committed all of the dirt road's turns to memory. The man called after him as he turned to go. Look. In a town this size, people chat. You're military, they say. Is that accurate?" Did Cole get a response? After giving a single nod, the man's gaze shifted to the Ranger service vest. "Up the ridge, I hope you're not causing any trouble. A person who is unpredictable is the last thing we need." Unpredictably, the word struck harder than planned. It was the sanitized form of dangerous, the courteous form of broken. Cole remained silent. He left without turning around. Now the morning air was cooler. Ranger brushed against his calf once more, giving him the silent consolation he offered him after loud noises, after nightmares, and after memories suddenly clawed their way back. Cole knelt next to him and briefly pressed his forehead against Ranger's. "It's just us, buddy," he said in a low voice. He stood, straightened his load, and turned to face the distant rising ridge. But that's enough. It's always been enough. He wasn't wanted in Timberline Valley. It had no faith in him. Cole, however, had not gained credibility. He had come to vanish, unaware that the same neighbors who had made fun of him would soon be knocking on his door and pleading with him and Ranger to save their lives. "Come on, boy," he said in a low voice. Together, they set out on the arduous journey to the place that no one desired, where a miracle and a storm awaited them. The gravel road that led to Northcliffe Ridge meandered through miles of pine forest, the kind that, after a few steps, swallowed daylight and sound. With his boots slipping a little into spots of old snow from spring storms, Cole slung his duffel over one shoulder. Beside him, Ranger trotted with his head held high, and his ears tuned to every tree crackling in the undergrowth. Cole was grounded just by the dog's presence. Every gentle step served as a reminder that he was not alone in this silent isolation. The trees dwindled enough for Cole to glimpse the ridge after almost an hour. With the exception of obstinate grass and boulders that would not dissolve, the earth rose like a scar, stark and battered by the wind. At the foot of the slope was a ruined cabin, its roof sagging inward as though it had been crushed by a gigantic hand. Farther up the slope, a second building had been ripped in two, its beams protruding like shattered ribs. The third was merely a snow-covered foundation close to the crest of the ridge. Cole hesitated. With its tail down, Ranger came to a stop next to him. "So this is it," Cole murmured. "Our new home." The wind answered first, a sharp whistle sliding down the ridge and slicing through Cole's jacket. Ranger growled softly as a gust tumbled loose snow across their boots. The land felt colder here, somehow meaner, as if testing him the moment he stepped foot on it. Cole walked toward the remains of the first cabin. The wood was gray and splintered, shredded at the edges. He ran his fingertips across the damage, picturing the people who had lived here before, what they must have faced, what they couldn't withstand. He didn't need anyone to tell him why the land had been abandoned. The evidence lay scattered in every direction. Northcliffe Ridge didn't just break homes. It broke the people who tried to tame it. Ranger let out a small bark, catching Cole's attention. The dog limped slightly, old scar tissue along his right paw tightening in the cold. Cole knelt, rubbing warmth into the leg until Ranger relaxed. "Easy, buddy," Cole whispered. "We'll make it work." I promise." They climbed higher, the wind growing stronger with every step until they reached the flat stretch of land Cole had purchased. A wooden stake marked the property line, half buried under fresh frost. The view was staggering. Below them, Timberline Valley looked peaceful, just a tiny scattering of lights and rooftops tucked between pine ridges. But up here, the world felt raw and indifferent. A place where a man either built something smarter than the weather or didn't build anything at all. Cole swallowed hard. He knew what the locals said. That ridge chewed through men tougher than you. That land is cursed. No veteran, no broken mind should be living up there. He tried to shake the thoughts away, but part of him couldn't help feeling the weight of their judgment. It pressed against old wounds, stirring memories he had buried deep. Faces, sand, fire, the thud of sudden silence after a blast. Ranger nudged his leg again, grounding him. Cole let out a slow breath. "Yeah, I hear you." He set down his duffel, unrolled a small notebook, and flipped through sketches from his military days. Temporary field shelters, curved blast deflectors, reinforced arch structures engineered to survive explosions and sandstorms. A design he had once dismissed as too ugly for civilian life, now pulsed with possibility. And then it happened. As the wind ripped across the ridge, snow slid off a curved boulder just ahead of them. The angle, the way the drift broke apart without weight being added, the clean shed of snow. It triggered something in Cole's memory. A shelter he had once taken cover under overseas. The way curved metal sent shrapnel skimming instead of penetrating. The way it stayed standing even when the ground trembled beneath it. Cole's breath caught. A cabin with a normal roof didn't survive here because a normal roof wasn't meant to, but something curved. Something arched that would shed the snow, that would break the wind, that could hold. "Ranger," he whispered, eyes widening. "I know what we're going to build." Ranger tilted his head, ears high. "An arch cabin," Cole said, "a shell over a home. Not fighting the weather, outsmarting it." For the first time since arriving in Timberline Valley, something warm flickered behind Cole's ribs. Not confidence exactly, but purpose. A reason to stay, a challenge worth taking on. He imagined it right there on the ridge, 40 feet long, wide enough to cover a full cabin, strong enough to laugh at the storms that had destroyed everything else. A place that couldn't be torn down, couldn't be crushed, couldn't be erased. A place where ghosts couldn't reach him. And then he heard it, voices traveling up the ridge. Cole turned to see 3 townspeople watching him from the lower path. Caleb Moore stood in front, arms crossed, expression twisted with amusement and skepticism. "Looks like you found the graveyard," Caleb called. 3 families tried that land, lost roofs, lost money, nearly lost their lives. Cole didn't answer. Caleb smirked. "But hey, we heard you're some kind of military engineer. Maybe you'll last longer than a month." The woman behind him whispered something, and the others snickered. Ranger stepped forward, growling low, his stance protective. "Control your dog, soldier," Caleb said. "We don't need another unstable veteran up here." Cole's jaw tightened. For a moment, he felt heat rising behind his eyes, the familiar buzz of adrenaline, the tightness in his chest, the flicker of memory he struggled to bury. Ranger sensed it instantly, pressing against Cole's thigh, steadying him. Cole forced himself to stay calm. "We're just passing through." Caleb laughed. "Hope so. You're not welcome up here. Ridge will finish you off anyway." The group turned and started back down, still muttering. Cole looked once more at the broken foundations, then at the open sky above him. The wind roared across Northcliffe Ridge, cold and merciless, but Cole stood his ground. If they couldn't build something strong enough, he murmured, "Then I will." Ranger barked once in agreement. The ridge wasn't cursed. It was simply waiting for someone stubborn enough, smart enough, and broken enough to understand it. Cole gathered his bag, tightened the straps, and faced the land that everyone else feared. "Come on, boy," he said. "Time to build something that can't be torn down." And with that, he and Ranger walked deeper into the wind, unaware that this brutal stretch of mountain would one day become the only safe place left in the valley. The next morning, Cole stood at the base of North Cliff Ridge with a notebook under one arm and determination simmering in his chest. The sky was a pale winter blue, thin and brittle, like it might crack with the wrong breath of wind. Ranger sniffed every drift of snow, ears twitching at distant sounds only he could hear. Cole flipped open the notebook, studying the rough sketches he'd made the night before by lantern light, curved ribs, reinforced steel, a shell that wrapped around a cabin the way armor wrapped around a soldier's chest. He didn't know what the townspeople thought they saw in him. Lost cause, broken mind, unstable veteran. But the truth was far simpler. He had survived years of things meant to kill him. And so would his home. He walked Ranger down the ridge trail into town, heading straight for the hardware and supply store. The bell over the door jingled, and heads turned sharply. Too sharply for comfort. A few customers froze, staring at Ranger first and then Cole. Someone muttered under their breath. Another eased aside as if giving space to something unpredictable. Cole kept his tone level. "Morning." Henry Lawson, the store owner, cleared his throat. "Back already. I need steel panels, the curved kind. Also anchor bolts, concrete mix, and a few tools." Henry blinked. "Curved steel. What for?" "Building a shelter." "A shelter?" Henry repeated flatly. "Up on North Cliff. That ridge eats shelters. This one will be different." A customer behind Cole snorted. "Is that what the last three said?" Another chuckled. "Maybe he's building a bunker." That's what vets do when they've seen too much. The laughter wasn't loud, but it hit Cole like a wave, sharp, metallic, triggering the familiar sting in his sternum. The store's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, echoing too closely to static radios from his past. Ranger sensed the shift instantly, stepping forward until his shoulder touched Cole's leg, grounding him. Henry raised an eyebrow. "What kind of shelter are you making anyway?" Cole opened his notebook and laid it on the counter. "An arch cabin, steel shell. It deflects wind and sheds snow." Henry stared at the page in silence, then looked up at Cole as if the man had spoken a foreign language. "You want to build a half-cylinder over a house?" "Exactly." "Well, it's something," Henry inquired. "Will you place the steel order?" Henry hesitated. "That's a lot of money and a lot of work. And no offense meant, son, but folks here think you should take it slow. Maybe ease back into things." A softer laugh came from behind him. "Yeah, wouldn't want him snapping and taking down the ridge with him." A few customers chuckled. Cole stood motionless, jaw tight. But he didn't respond. He had endured enough to know words thrown by strangers carried less weight than the ones he whispered to himself in the dark. Rear's head turned toward the laughter, one low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. The people nearby stiffened, stepping back quickly. Henry raised his hands. "Easy now." Cole closed the notebook and tucked it under his arm. "If you won't order this deal, I'll find another way." Henry frowned. "Look, it's not that." "It's fine," Cole said. "Thanks for your time." He walked out before the humiliation could settle any deeper under his skin. Ranger stayed glued to his side, alert and protective, giving one last look over his shoulder before the door shut behind them. Outside, Cole sucked in the cold mountain air, letting the bite of it steady him. He crouched beside Ranger, rubbing the dog's fur. "We don't need them, buddy. We've done more with less." Ranger nudged his hand as if agreeing. Cole didn't waste another minute. He headed toward the edge of town, toward the old mining road he'd passed the day before. Locals had mentioned the mine shutting down years earlier, leaving behind piles of scrap metal nobody cared enough to haul out. The road was slick with ice, but the sun glinted off something in the distance. Rusted corrugated panels, stacked in crooked rows like grave markers. Jackpot. The closer he got, the more he realized just how much material had been abandoned. Carcasses of old machinery, bent beams, steel panels long enough to be reshaped into the curved ribs he needed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty. But it was enough to start. Cole ran his hand along the edge of one panel. We can work with this. But nothing on Northcliffe Ridge came easy. He tried lifting one of the panels only for it to slip from his hands, the sharp metal catching his glove and slicing through into his palm. Pain flared bright and sudden. Blood seeped into the snow. Ranger wedged sharply, circling him. "It's okay," Cole murmured, wrapping his hand with a strip of cloth. "Just a scratch." It wasn't just a scratch, but he'd stitched worse in the field without blinking. He looked around, gauging the sheer amount of steel he'd need to move. The distance to the ridge, the steep incline. The size of the task was overwhelming, ridiculous, impossible for one man to do alone, which was exactly why he had to do it. He hauled the first panel onto his shoulder, staggered under its weight, and took one step, then another. The metal pressed into bruises he didn't remember earning, but he kept going. Ranger trotted ahead, checking the path and waiting when Cole lagged. Slow and steady, Cole muttered, "We've done worse marches." By the third trip up the ridge, his shoulders were trembling. By the fifth, he tasted iron and cold on his tongue, but something inside him pushed him harder than any sergeant ever had. With every load, he saw the arch a little clearer in his mind. With every step, he heard the sting of those mocking voices fading behind him. And that night, as the sun bled out behind jagged peaks, and a thin layer of frost crept over the panels he dragged home, Cole stood on his land, sweating, bleeding, exhausted, and saw something no one else could see. A future ranger sat beside him, chest rising and falling in fatigue, but eyes bright with loyalty. Cole placed a hand on his head. "We'll show them, Ranger," he whispered. "We'll show them all." The wind howled across Northcliffe Ridge as if laughing at him. But Cole didn't flinch. For the first time since setting foot in Timberline Valley, he wasn't just surviving. He was building. But Northcliffe Ridge had a way of testing every man who dared claim it. By the second week, Cole's plan to haul scrap steel from the abandoned mine had become a grueling routine. Each morning, frost clung to the ridge like a second skin, the ground hard as iron beneath his boots. Cole woke before sunrise, stuffed a few protein bars into his pocket, checked Rur's injured paw, and began the long trek down the trail. Every trip felt like walking through a doorway that led back into the hardest days of his past. Silent, demanding, unforgiving. The mine site sat in a bowl of rock and shadow, echoing with the hollow groans of metal shifting in the cold. Cole would search through rusted heaps, choose panels that were still intact, and heave them onto his shoulder one by one. He had to angle them just right, or the sharp edges would bite through gloves and skin. Even being careful wasn't enough. On the fourth day, he lifted a heavy curved section, and the metal slipped. It swung downward, carving a clean gash across the back of his hand. Blood splattered onto the snow, a startling red against endless white. Ranger barked sharply and pressed against him, tail stiff with concern. Cole hissed through clenched teeth, examining the wound. "It's all right, buddy," he muttered. He placed a strip of fabric over the wounded hand, knotted it with his teeth, and continued despite the severe sting. He had always been that kind of man, patched up, stitched together, and constantly on the go. The ridge, however, refused to give in. On the 7th day, too much steel caused the borrowed wagon's wheels to break. Cole tried to mend it with numb fingers for almost an hour while kneeling in the snow. 2 huge sheets resting against a fallen log were overturned by a sudden blast of wind. The collision sounded like a far-off explosion across the valley. Cole's muscles seized instantly. He began to breathe more rapidly. For a moment, he was no longer in Montana. He had returned to Helmand. Alarms ringing, sand tearing at his eyes. The air was filled with dust, and the ranger was barking wildly. Ranger grounded Cole by pressing his weight against his hip. Cole exhaled, his breath coming out shakily. "Thanks," he whispered. "I'm back." Cole wouldn't let go of the metal when the wagon eventually failed permanently. Grasping rough edges until his palms burnt through the bandages, he manually hauled each heavy piece up the ridge. With a slight limp on his recovering paw, Ranger helped as much as he could, grabbing smaller portions with his teeth and pulling them up the trail. Cole felt his heart tighten each time Ranger tripped. "Easy, boy," he repeatedly cautioned. Even so, Ranger was a working dog who had been trained to persevere. Don't push yourself too hard. By the 9th day, Cole's hand cuts had reopened, leaving his gloves a deep scarlet color. He didn't grumble, just glanced up at Cole with those steady brown eyes as though to say, "We're in this together." He sewed up ripped skin with a needle and fishing line at night, while sitting inside his makeshift tent with a lantern blazing. Ranger lay with his head on Cole's boot, watching every movement with quiet worry. "You remember when I was the one patching you up?" Cole asked quietly. "Tight spaces, dirt everywhere. You were always calm, braver than half the guys I served with." Ranger let out a soft grunt as if acknowledging the memory. That night, a storm swept over Timberline Valley with no warning. Not a fierce blizzard, just a sudden violent downpour mixed with sleet. Cole rushed outside to cover the steel panels before they froze together. At one point, he slipped on the slick ground, the world tilting as the edge of a panel came crashing toward him. Ranger lunged forward, barking loudly enough to jolt Cole back to his senses. The panel slammed into the ground inches from his leg. "That could have crushed me," Cole muttered, sitting breathless in the slush. Ranger nudged his chest insistently. "You're right," Cole whispered, chest tightening. "I need to be more careful." But careful wasn't enough when the land itself seemed determined to break him. On the 15th trip up the ridge, a storm cloud settled low, covering everything in thick gray haze. The world shrunk to a blur of snow and rock. Cole pushed against the gale, carrying a sheet of steel almost as tall as he was. The wind shoved him sideways. His boots skidded on loose gravel. He went down hard. The steel panel landed across his shoulders, knocking the air from his lungs. Pain shot through his back. For a terrifying moment, he couldn't breathe. Ranger barked frantically, circling him, pawing at the edge of the panel as if trying to lift it. Cole forced his muscles to respond. Inch by inch, he rolled to the side, letting the weight slide off into the snow. His breath came fast and ragged. Ranger pressed his forehead against Cole's cheek, whining softly. "I'm fine," Cole lied, feeling heat radiating from the strain in his ribs. "We're okay." But exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. Each trip up the ridge blurred into the next. By the end of the second week, he'd hauled enough steel to begin shaping the ribs of the arch, lining them in the snow like the bones of a great metal beast waiting to rise. One evening, as the sun dipped low, coloring the sky in bruised violet, Cole stumbled into camp and dropped to his knees from sheer fatigue. Ranger immediately circled behind him, nudging his back to keep him upright. Cole closed his eyes. The cold stung his cheeks. His breath fogged slowly in front of him. "Just need a minute," he whispered. But a minute turned into stillness. Stillness turned into darkness, and then nothing. Ranger barked, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the quiet. The dog nudged Cole again, harder this time, then ran down the trail, barking relentlessly into the dusk. Footsteps pounded up moments later. Cole. Cole. Emily's voice cut through the haze. Cole blinked awake to see Ranger beside Emily, tail low, body trembling with worry. Emily knelt, checking his pulse, touching his forehead with the back of her hand. "You're dehydrated," she said firmly, and exhausted. "You can't keep doing this alone." Cole tried to speak, but the words tangled. Emily wrapped her coat around his shoulders. "You're going to get yourself killed on that ridge." He managed a faint smile. "Not with Ranger around." Emily looked at the dog, her expression softening. He knew something was wrong. "He came straight to my cabin." Cole swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the loyalty pressed against him on both sides. One human, one canine. "Let's get you up," Emily said gently. Slow now, together, with Ranger leaning into his leg the whole way. They returned to camp. And as Cole lay beneath his blankets that night, muscles aching, hands bandaged, Ranger curled close to keep him warm. A realization settled deep in his chest. This ridge wasn't just testing him. It was daring him. And he intended to win. The next morning, the sky over North Cliff Ridge glowed a cold silver. The kind that warned of a storm still weeks away, but already gathering strength. Cole stepped out of his tent, his breath hanging in pale clouds, muscles stiff, but mind sharp with purpose. Ranger stretched beside him, shaking off the night chill before trotting ahead toward the neatly stacked steel ribs Cole had dragged up the ridge, one brutal trip at a time. Today was the day the arch would begin to take shape. Cole knelt beside Ranger, rubbing behind the dog's ear. "Ready to build something crazy?" Ranger barked once, tail thumping. It was all the encouragement Cole needed. He spent the morning marking drill points and aligning anchor bolts. Every movement hurt. His hands were wrapped thickly, and his ribs still ached from where the steel panel had slammed him days earlier. But pain meant he was still going, still fighting. The ridge's wind whipped around him, tugging at his jacket, swirling frost along the ground. But unlike the homes that had failed here before, Cole's arch wouldn't fight the wind. It would ride with it. He set the first steel rib into place, its curved shape catching the pale winter light. Rosa's ears stood tall, watching intently as if sensing the importance of the moment. Cole tightened the bolts one at a time, checking and rechecking the alignment. When the rib stood solidly upright, he stepped back and exhaled in awe. It stood like the spine of a giant, unbreakable, unyielding, a promise. Ranger trotted underneath the arch rib, sniffing it proudly. "We're getting there," Cole whispered. By noon, a handful of townspeople appeared on the trail, drawn not by curiosity, but by doubt. Word traveled fast in Timberline Valley, and nothing traveled faster than the suspicion that the new veteran on the ridge was building something impossible. Caleb Moore led the group, boots crunching in the frost, arms crossed and mouth already twisted into a smirk. "Well, look at that," Caleb called out. "Thought you were building a house, not a whale skeleton." Laughter rolled through the group. Cole didn't look up. "It's an arch frame." Caleb snorted. "Looks like something that's going to collapse as soon as the wind sneezes." More chuckles. Ranger stood stiffly beside Cole, fur rising along his spine. Caleb took another few steps up the ridge, studying the rib. "Tell me something, soldier. You planning to hide under that thing when the storms come?" You think metal's going to save you from this ridge? Cole tightened a bolt, jaw steady. It's not meant to hide. It's meant to outlast. Outlast? Caleb squinted. Nothing outlasts Northcliffe. Ask the 3 families before you. Oh, wait. You can't. They left after losing everything. A couple of the townspeople nodded in agreement. Cole straightened. All of their roofs were flat or peaked. Mine won't hold snow. It'll shed it. There's a difference. Caleb raised an eyebrow. And you learned that we're in the war? The way he said it, mocking, belittling, made something bitter twist in Cole's chest. Images flashed unbidden. Dust storms swallowing bases whole. Curved protective shelters standing firm while everything shook around them. Ranger dragging him through shattered concrete after the blast. Yes, Cole said evenly. In the war, some things built for survival don't need to be pretty, just strong. Caleb let out a loud laugh. Well, at least you know it's not pretty. More laughter followed. Ranger growled, stepping between Cole and the group. Caleb backed up quickly, raising a hand. Hey, now control your dog. Cole placed a steadying hand on Ranger's collar. He senses intention. You calling me dangerous? Caleb barked. Cole let the silence answer for him. Henry Lawson, owner of the hardware store, had joined the group but stayed behind Caleb. His expression unreadable. Let him work, Henry finally said. It's his land. Caleb scoffed but didn't argue. The group slowly dispersed, muttering under their breath as they went back down the trail. When they were out of sight, Cole knelt beside Ranger. Good boy. But you can't bite the neighbors, no matter how much they deserve it. Ranger huffed as if disappointed by the rule, then leaned his weight into Cole's side. Cole returned to the work, the interruption only fueling his determination. He lifted the second rib, bracing it against the wind, and hammered anchor bolts into the ground until the vibrations numbed his arms. Hours passed and the structure began to take shape, a line of steel ribs arching upward like the beginnings of a sanctuary. By late afternoon, the sun dipped low, casting long blue shadows across the ridge. Cole climbed a ladder to secure the top joint of the third rib. As he hammered, the steel hummed with each strike, echoing through the empty land like a heartbeat. Wind ripped across the ridge. Then, sharp and sudden, it shoved the ribs sideways, rocking the ladder. Cole's balance wavered, and for a terrifying instant his feet slipped. Ranger barked sharply, pacing below as Cole caught himself on the rung and steadied the rib with a trembling hand. He froze. Breath hitched as the echo of falling metal blurred into a familiar nightmare. The collapsing rubble, the ringing in his ears, Ranger tugging at his uniform to pull him out of the dust. Cole squeezed his eyes shut. Not again. Not here. Not this time. He gripped the ladder tighter, grounding himself with slow breaths. Ranger wed softly below, ears pinned back, sensing the memory clawing at his handler. I'm okay, Cole whispered. I'm okay, buddy. He hammered the joint into place with renewed focus, finishing minutes before the daylight faded completely. When the final bolt tightened, Cole climbed down and viewed the rising structure from a distance. 3 ribs stood tall now, their curves catching the dying light like the arches of a cathedral. A shelter, a refuge, a beginning. Ranger stood proudly at the center of the frame, his silhouette framed by steel and sky. This is really happening, Cole murmured. He walked beneath the ribs, the air stilling inside the space, shielding him slightly from the biting ridge wind. For the first time, he felt the promise of warmth, safety, and something he hadn't dared hope for. A home. Ranger pressed against him, tail wagging slowly. Yeah, Cole whispered. We're building something that can't be torn down. Above them, the steel ribs hummed softly in the evening wind, as if the ridge itself were acknowledging him. Not welcoming, but no longer denying him either. It was only the beginning. And by winter, the valley would learn exactly what that meant. By the time the 6th rib of the arch went up, Cole finally understood why 3 different families had abandoned North Cliff Ridge. The wind never rested. It prowled the mountain like a living thing, snapping at clothing, rattling metal, howling through the skeleton of the rising structure. Yet inside the curved frame, even unfinished, there was a strange calm. The gusts split and rolled off the steel, leaving a pocket of stillness beneath the ribs. That stillness became fuel for Cole's hope. Early one morning, when the first glow of sunlight touched the ridge, Cole stood inside the half-finished arch and imagined the cabin that would one day sit here. Ranger padded beside him, nose low, tail swaying. The dog already treated the spot as home, circling the snow-packed ground, checking the perimeter like he'd done 100 times on foreign soil. "Yeah," Cole murmured. "We'll put the cabin right here. You'll sleep by the stove and have sturdy walls and a tight roof. You've earned that." Ranger nudged his hand, warm breath misting in the cold. With the arch ribs secured and bracing in place, Cole began hauling lumber from town. The small trailer he borrowed from Henry Lawson complained endlessly under the weight of fresh-cut planks. Each creak reminded Cole that this cabin wasn't going to be pretty. It wasn't going to be stylish or polished like the picture-perfect cabins tourists like to rent. It was going to survive. And that was enough. The first walls went up slowly. Cole measured each board twice, cut once, and checked the level 3 times. An old habit from the days when a miscalculation meant more than wasted lumber. Ranger watched from the center of the arch, ears flicking as every hammer strike sent echoes bouncing between the steel ribs. The arch amplified the sound. But it didn't frighten Ranger. Instead, he sat calmly, tail thumping in rhythm, as if approving each piece installed. By the end of the first week, the outline of a cabin stood within the steel embrace, small, sturdy, and shaped with the same determination that carried Cole through every scar life had carved into him. But Timberline Valley wasn't impressed. As Cole hammered siding into place one afternoon, he spotted movement down the trail. 3 people stood farther down: Caleb Moore, his brother-in-law Vince, and an older man Cole didn't recognize. They weren't close enough to talk without shouting over the wind, but their smirks carried plenty far. Caleb cuped his hands around his mouth. "Hey, you planning on living inside a tin can for the winter?" Vince chimed in. "Looks like a giant hamster wheel." The third man barked a laugh. "Bet the first big storm folds it up like a lawn chair." The words hit harder than Cole wanted to admit. Not because he believed them, but because Ranger stiffened beside him. The dog stepped forward, placing himself between Cole and the ridge path. Shoulders squared. "Easy," Cole said softly. "They're not worth it." But the truth was, the comments stung. Every jab made him question whether he belonged here. Every laugh scraped against tender memories, faces of people who once dismissed him the same way right before everything exploded. He took a slow breath. Ranger gently pressed his head against Cole's thigh. The world steadied. The men left eventually, but their voices lingered in the wind. As the sun dipped, Cole lit his first small fire inside the cabin frame. The scent of pine sap and warm smoke drifted upward, mixing with the metallic cold of the arch. Ranger curled on the new wooden floor, paws tucked under him. The glow from the lantern cast long shadows across the ribs, creating a cathedral of steel and wood. Cole sat with his back against the half-built wall. For the first time since coming home, he didn't feel like he was running from the past. He was building towards something bit by bit, plank by plank, Breath by breath, he whispered, "We're doing all right, buddy." Rose's tail gave a soft thump, but the ridge demanded more. Cole began building the roof, angled but not steep, since the arch would take the snow load instead of the cabin. Framing it inside the steel shell turned out to be harder than he expected. The angles felt counterintuitive, and every measurement required thinking in layers. Wood inside metal, insulation inside wood. More than once, he caught himself staring too long at the bright, empty sky beyond the arch frame. It wasn't debris or gunfire he feared now, but the possibility of failure. The ridge had beaten stronger men who didn't have to wrestle their own memories while wrestling lumber. One afternoon, while securing rafters, Cole's hand slipped, and he slammed his wrist against a beam. Pain shot up his arm. Ranger barked sharply, and Cole clutched the beam, fighting the flash of panic that followed sudden injury. He tasted dust again, heard distant shouting, felt heat, not cold. Ranger climbed the ladder's bottom step, whining softly. Cole blinked hard until the present returned. "I'm all right," he said, voice rough. "Just old ghosts." The next day brought Emily Carter up the ridge. She carried a thermos and a small basket covered with cloth. "You look like you've been through a war," she said gently. Cole huffed a dry laugh. "Been through too." She set the basket on a crate. "I made stew. Thought you and Ranger might eat something warm that didn't come from a can." Ranger trotted up to her, sniffed the basket, then sat politely beside her leg. Emily laughed and scratched behind his ears. Cole looked around at the rising walls. "It's slow work. No one else would have gotten this far," Emily said. "You're building something incredible." His throat tightened a little. "Not everyone thinks that, I know," she replied softly. "But people like Caleb don't understand the difference between stubborn and strong." She left after a short while, and Cole watched her trail disappear down the ridge. Ranger nudged the stew basket, tail wagging. "All right," Cole chuckled. "Let's eat." The food warmed him more than he'd expected. The kindness warmed him even more. Day by day, the cabin grew. 2 rooms instead of 1. A small loft for storage. Windows carefully cut to catch morning light. The porch, though sheltered under the arch, gave the place a sense of comfort, like a home rather than a bunker. Still, the townspeople continued their ridicule whenever they hiked up to gawk. Some took pictures. Others joked about starting bets on when the arch would collapse. Cole ignored them all because he could feel something they couldn't. Stability, strength, shelter. But it was the firewood stacked along the interior walls of the arch in thick, towering piles that began to turn whispers into outright disbelief. Cole cut wood sunrise to sundown, splitting logs until his shoulders throbbed, hauling them into the arch to protect them from moisture. Ranger dragged branches carrying smaller pieces in his mouth, even when his limp grew noticeable. By December, the firewood walls were nearly complete, massive barriers of neatly stacked logs lining both sides of the cabin, dry and ready. Henry Lawson visited again, staring wide-eyed. "That's enough wood to last 3 winters." "That's the point," Cole said. Henry shook his head slowly. "Storms hit harder up here. You're either crazy or a genius." Cole didn't answer, but the ridge did. Wind howled briefly, a warning. Snow blew across the sky in a thin, early veil. Winter was coming early, harsher than anyone expected. And for Cole and Ranger, it would bring the first true test of everything they'd built. 2 days after Henry's visit, the temperature dropped so sharply it felt as though Timberline Valley had stepped straight into January. Overnight, the sky turned a cold, bruised gray, heavy enough to make the air feel thick. Cole woke before dawn to silence. Deep, eerie silence, broken only by Russ's low, uneasy rumble. When Cole stepped outside the cabin, he understood why. A wall of clouds crept over the ridge like a living shadow, dragging the light out of the sky. Not drifting, rolling, devouring. It was the kind of formation soldiers learned to fear in deserts and mountains alike. A storm with its own heartbeat. "This is it," Cole murmured. Ranger pressed against his leg, tail stiff, ears pinned forward. The air tasted metallic. Cole made his rounds quickly, checking the anchor bolts on the arch, tapping each rib to feel its tension, pushing on the cabin walls to ensure the structure didn't shift under pressure. Everything held. Everything was ready, but readiness didn't stop the chill crawling up his spine. By mid-morning, the wind began. Not the playful gusts that teased at clothing, but a long rising roar that climbed the ridge with a predator's patience. It hit the arch first, slamming into the steel with a deep vibrating hum. Snow lifted from the ground in spirals, dancing like white ghosts around the cabin. Inside the arch, however, the difference was immediate. The steel shell deflected the gusts, splitting them and sending them sliding along the curve. The air stilled. It was like standing inside the eye of a storm that had not yet arrived. "Just like it's supposed to work," Cole whispered. But Ranger wasn't convinced. The dog stood at the arch entrance, staring out at the horizon with unblinking intensity. By noon, the first flakes fell. Big, heavy, wet, turning the ridge into a blur of white. The wind whistled layers over the arch, and the snow clung briefly before sliding off in clean ribbons. Still, Cole felt uneasy. He'd seen storms shift from manageable to monstrous in minutes. He carried firewood inside the cabin and lit the stove. Ranger lay nearby, but his ears twitched with every distant thud of wind. "Sit," Cole said gently. Ranger sat, but his gaze never left the window. As the afternoon darkened into premature evening, the storm intensified. The winds howled across Northcliffe Ridge with a fury that rattled even the steel bones of the arch. Snow hit the metal like handfuls of gravel. The sky turned to swirling white. No horizon, no ground. Just the storm swallowing the world outside. Then came the sound that froze Cole in place. A low, muffled creak. Not from the arch. No, this came from within him, deep in memory. A flash of heat behind his eyes, Ranger barking over sandstorms. The sudden shift of weight before a blast. The ringing, the dust, the collapse. Cole slammed his eyes shut, gripping the table to stay grounded. Ranger leapt to his side, whining, pressing against him with insistent strength. "I'm here," Cole whispered hoarsely. "I'm here, not there. I'm here." He knelt, one hand grabbing fistfuls of Rose's fur, feeling the warmth, the steadiness, the realness. Slow breaths, slow return. Outside, the wind shrieked again, long, high, like metal tearing. Cole stood slowly, clearing his throat. "All right. Storm's trying to scare us. Let's show it we're not moving." Ranger barked once, sharper this time, confidence returning. As night settled, the storm evolved from fierce to brutal. The cabin shook faintly, but the arch held firm. Snow piled on top of the shell, only long enough to be swept off again by the wind's sharp edge. The design was doing exactly what Cole hoped. But he knew this was only the first wave. Around midnight, Cole dressed in his heavy coat and stepped outside into the archer's sheltered space. The wind thrashed just beyond the threshold, but inside the shell, the air was unbelievably calm. The snow didn't touch him. The ground was bare around the cabin while the world outside was buried inch by inch. He walked to the entrance of the arch and looked out. What he saw made him step back. The valley below was nearly invisible. Snow spiraled in violent columns, bending sideways under wind strong enough to shake trees. Even through the blinding white haze, Cole could see roofs losing shingles, power lines swaying dangerously, and distant lights flickering across Timberline Valley. This wasn't just an early winter storm. It was a warning. Rangers stood beside him, fur whipping in the wind, swirling outside the arch. But he didn't retreat. Not while Cole was still there. "Come on," Cole said, patting his side. "Nothing more we can do out here." Back in the cabin, he added wood to the stove and checked his radio. The frequencies crackled with static, every channel drowned by the storm. It wasn't until the third attempt that a voice cut through. "Whiteout conditions. Roads closed. Stay indoors. Do not attempt travel. Wind speeds exceeding." The message cut out, swallowed by static. Cole sat back, staring at the radio. "What do you think, boy?" he asked softly. "Is this the start of something bigger?" Ranger rested his head on Cole's knee, giving a quiet huff. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. The windows trembled. The arch groaned but stayed strong. And the cabin, small, warm, and stubborn, held its ground. Near dawn, a sudden boom echoed outside, distant but unmistakable. Ranger snapped upright, growling low. Cole grabbed his coat and rushed out to the arch entrance again. A glow lit the valley below. A fire, something large, something important, but the storm swallowed the rest, forbidding him from knowing more until daylight. "Whatever that is," Cole whispered, heart tightening. "It's not good." He closed the cabin door, stoked the fire, and sat beside Ranger through the final hours of darkness. The storm had arrived. The valley wasn't ready. But Cole and Ranger were, because everything they had built, everything the town mopped, was about to matter in ways no one could imagine. When dawn finally pushed through the storm's thinning belly, it revealed the landscape twisted beyond recognition. The storm had carved the valley into a white wasteland. Snow drifts rose higher than pickup trucks. Roofs sagged. Trees leaned at unnatural angles, their branches splintered under the weight of the night. Cole stood at the entrance of the arch, the pale morning light catching on the steel above him. Inside the shell, the ground was dry. The air, though still cold, was calm. His design had worked exactly as he hoped, but Timberline Valley had not been so lucky. Ranger moved ahead of him, paws crunching in the snow as they walked closer to the arch opening. The dog stopped abruptly, staring down at the valley below. Cole followed his gaze. The fire he saw during the storm was still burning. Thick smoke curled upward from the town's storage barn, a massive building near the center of Timberline Valley. Half the roof had collapsed, exposing flames licking at the remaining structure. The fire cast an eerie orange glow across the snow. Cole exhaled slowly. "That's not good." Ranger wed, pacing, restless. Cole scanned the ridge trail. Steep, buried, obscured. There was no safe way down until the winds calmed more. For the moment, all he could do was watch. Hours passed. The fire eventually died, choked by snow and lack of oxygen, but the damage had already spread. Cole could see other roofs caved in under the night's brutal snowfall. A few chimneys remained, stubbornly upright against the devastation. By midday, Ranger alerted first. A sharp bark followed by a tense stance. Someone was coming up the ridge. Footsteps crunched through the knee-high snow, uneven and frantic. Cole stepped forward, bracing himself. The figure appeared a moment later, a man stumbling, leaning heavily against a walking stick, frost clinging to his beard. It was Thomas Grady, the elderly postmaster. Cole hurried toward him. "Thomas, you all right?" Thomas collapsed into the archer's coverage, chest heaving. He looked older than Cole remembered. Far older. It's bad, Cole." Thomas gasped. "The whole valley, the roofs, the fire. People are stranded." Ranger pressed against Thomas's leg as if encouraging him to continue. Thomas wiped melted snow from his face. "The general store roof gave out. The boarding house, too. Families are without heat. Caleb's place is half gone. Folks are using what little they have to stay warm. but the storm destroyed most of the firewood stacks. Cole swallowed. He'd seen the valley woodpiles, small, barely enough for a normal winter week. But this storm wasn't normal. Any casualties? Cole asked. Thomas shook his head. No deaths yet, but frostbite, broken bones, and now the fire. The barn was full of emergency supplies. Everything's gone. Cole breathed deeply, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. Thomas's eyes drifted toward the arch. Your place. It held. It actually held. Cole nodded quietly. That's what I built it for. Thomas hesitated, then spoke softly. Caleb sent me. He said he's sorry. And he's coming up here with others. They need help, Cole. They need shelter. Cole stiffened. Caleb, the man who mocked him at every turn, who told him the ridge would break him, now coming to ask for help. He looked at Ranger. Ranger stared back, calm, steady, loyal as ever. Cole sighed. Anyone's welcome here. The storm winds picked up again as Thomas limped outside the arch, waving to the figures now emerging through the drifting white. There were 6 of them at first. Caleb, his wife Mara, and their daughter Rosie among them. The child could barely walk. Caleb carried her inside the arch. Her little hands blew from cold. Behind them came more. Vince with his arm in a sling. The Jensen twins wrapped in blankets. Old Mrs. Laramie leaning heavily on one of her grandsons. Cole stepped aside to let them in. Get them inside the arch. Stay out of the wind. Caleb stopped in front of Cole, chest heaving, eyes red from cold and smoke. I was wrong, he said, voice cracking. About everything. Cole nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was enough for now. The families gathered inside the arch, huddling close as the wind battered the metal shell. Ranger moved among them, checking each person, offering warmth and comfort. Children reached out to pet him, their frozen fingers warming under his fur. The shell amplified the storm outside, humming like a distant engine. But the air inside remained steady, shielded, safe. Caleb stared up at the arch ribs with disbelief. I can't believe this thing is standing. Cole looked around at the space. Dry ground, towering firewood stacks, the cabin snug inside its armor. It was built to stand, he said quietly. But the storm wasn't done with Timberland Valley. A sudden boom echoed across the ridge. Snow cascaded from trees. The arch vibrated under the shockwave, but held firm. Vince staggered to the arch opening and looked out. That came from the schoolhouse, he said, voice shaking. It must have lost another piece of the roof. Caleb rubbed his face, exhausted. This storm, it's tearing the valley apart. Cole stared into the white blur, the distant sound of breaking timber echoing through the wind. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who wanted to disappear, but now looking at the terrified families gathered inside the shelter he built, he understood something deep and unsettling. He had built this for himself, but it was never meant to be only for him. Ranger stood beside Cole, eyes forward, posture alert. A soldier stance, Cole whispered, yeah boy. I see it. The wind howled louder, shadows shifting outside the arch. The ridge groaned under the weight of incoming snow. Night was falling again. And the storm wasn't finished. But Cole was ready to face whatever came next. He had built a refuge strong enough to withstand the ridge. And soon the whole valley would depend on it. As evening fell on the second night of the storm, the wind's voice changed. It no longer howled. It screamed. The snowdrifts outside the arch grew into white cliffs, rising inch by inch, swallowing the landscape. The arch vibrated with deep metallic groans, like a living creature bracing itself against the mountain's fury. Inside, lantern light flickered over fearful faces, and Ranger moved from family to family, pressing against shivering legs, warming cold hands, calming crying children. Then, above the roar, a sound broke through. Not the storm, not falling trees, not the groan of distant collapsing roofs. Knocking, but not just knocking, pounding hard, desperate, fists striking metal with everything they had. Cole stiffened. Rose's head shot up, ears sharp, muscles taut. The pounding grew louder, accompanied by choked voices. "Please, someone help us." Cole grabbed his coat and stepped toward the arch entrance. As he approached, the lantern light from behind threw his shadow long across the steel ribs. Ranger stayed glued to his side. When Cole reached the mouth of the arch, he pushed aside the heavy tarp he'd hung to keep drifting snow from entering. What he saw struck him straight in the chest. A group of nearly 20 people, faces raw with cold, clothes shredded by wind, eyes wild with fear, crowded at the entrance. Snow clung to their eyelashes. Frost had turned their hair white. Some carried small children wrapped in blankets stiff with ice. A few hobbled on injured legs, and at the front, barely recognizable beneath layers of frost, was Caleb Moore. His lips trembled as he tried to speak, but his voice cracked before the words formed. Mara clutched their daughter, Rosie, whose tiny fingers were purple at the tips. A wave of exhaustion and humiliation broke over Caleb's features as he forced himself to meet Cole's eyes. "Cole." His voice shook. Please let us in." Behind him, Rosie whimpered softly. A sound so faint Cole almost didn't hear it over the storm. Ranger stepped forward, sniffing the air, analyzing every trembling figure. Cole felt the dog's hesitation melt with a small, soft whine. Ranger understood before Cole did. These weren't critics. These weren't doubters. These were people on the edge of survival. Cole's chest tightened. For a moment, one short, painful moment, memories threatened to consume him. Sand, smoke, screams, a friend's hand slipping away. He tasted dust. Heard the echo of commands shouted through static. Ranger pressed against him with quiet urgency, reminding him where he was. Cole blinked hard, clearing the haze. "Get inside," he said, voice steady. Relief washed across the group like a flood. Caleb nearly collapsed as he staggered forward, whispering a hoarse, "Thank you. Thank you." Cole guided families into the open space beneath the arch, helping them settle onto blankets and pallets near the walls of firewood. The arch held the storm at bay. The wind outside raged, but inside the steel shell, the air remained calm, almost eerily so. As the new arrivals warmed up, Cole took stock. Frostbite on several hands and feet, 3 sprained ankles, a broken wrist, dozens shaking with cold. Emily rushed from one family to another, tending to injuries with the efficiency of someone who had learned to stay calm through chaos. Meanwhile, Caleb stood alone near the entrance, staring at the archer's ribs with haunted eyes. Snow still dusted his eyebrows. His face was red and raw from windburn. When Cole approached, he swallowed hard. "I don't deserve to be here," Caleb whispered. Cole crossed his arms. "But you are. I made fun of you. I made fun of this location. I said you were unstable to others." Caleb's voice cracked. "I told them this thing would fall before Christmas." Cole didn't answer, and Ranger stepped between them, nudging his hand in an unexpected show of assurance. Caleb blinked in surprise, then slowly put his shaking hand on Ranger's head. Cole sighed. "We focus on staying alive first." With tears in his eyes, Caleb nodded and said, "This time, it's not the cold. Apologies come later." Another ferocious explosion came from the storm outside. Sheets of snow fell sideways, creating a thick, swirling wall of white that covered the valley. The blow caused the arch to tremble, but it remained firm. Children gathered inside, putting their fingers in Ranger's warm fur. Couples encircled one another with blankets. In the peaceful sanctuary Cole had created, families held on to one another as their breathing gradually became more steady. Cole went from group to group, rationing wood, adjusting vents, and monitoring the stove to make sure everyone was warm. Following closely behind, Ranger used his presence as a salve, letting terrified children lean against him and resting his head in their laps. Hours went by. There was no indication that the storm would abate. With a guilty expression on his face, Caleb went up to Cole once more. "There will be more, Cole." Cole blinked. "More. We were unable to climb with them. An elderly couple from Elm Street is present. The boy from Jenkins who had a terrible knee. If they're still out there, perhaps others." His voice faded. Cole turned to face the ridge route clogged by storms. Anything over 10 feet was engulfed by a wall of white. It felt like needles piercing exposed flesh as the wind swirled so fiercely. After hearing what was being said, Emily moved ahead. "Cole, it's too risky. You are unable to go outside." "I'm not abandoning anyone," Cole declared. "Ready." Ranger gave a short biting bark. Emily's terrified eyes grew wide. "Please, Cole, you almost made it when you built this facility. This storm is more severe." Cole touched the vest of Rare. "I'm not alone. I've been in worse." Ranger was willing and steady as he pressed into him. Shaking his head, Caleb took a step forward. "Instead, let me go. I owe those folks. I owe you." Cole remarked, not rudely, but factually, "You won't make it. I have already done this using Ranger. Difficult terrain, poor visibility, and search patterns." It triggered a recollection. A Ranger is extracting coal from debris. His lungs were flooded with smoke. Cole turned his head away. "Remain here." "Aid Emily." Cole firmly said, "Keep everyone warm." He pulled a candle and a coil of rope, checked Ranger's harness and pulled his coat tighter. Cole nodded once, then said, "Watch the stove. Keep the door shut behind us." Emily's voice trembled as she pleaded, "Come back, please." He then moved toward the arch entrance. Beside him, Ranger was already braced. He shivered, clung to hope, and turned back to the families. They all watched as the man they had previously questioned got ready to face a storm that had already wiped out half of their world. Cole inhaled deeply. Then he stepped into the white emptiness with Ranger. They were immediately swept away by the wind. Like a curtain, the snow closed behind them. The challenge was roared by the storm. Cole, however, didn't flinch since he was no longer merely surviving. He was saving. As soon as Cole and Ranger Hull crossed the arch, the storm engulfed them. Cole's posture leaned forward as the wind crashed at them, robbing his air. They were unable to see more than a few feet in front of them as the snow swirled in ferocious currents. With the steadiness of a seasoned companion who was as familiar with these assignments as Cole was, Ranger remained firmly at his left side, guiding him. Ranger sensed the stress in the rope that was clipped between them as Cole yelled into the wind, "Stay close, buddy." The gusts drowned out his voice. The storm turned into an inch-by-inch battle. Cole used a walking pole to probe the hidden track while leaning into the wind. The ground threatened to pitch him forward on multiple occasions when it sank lower than anticipated. Before every invisible dip, Ranger would give him a little tug to warn him. They noticed a shape, hardly more than a smudge against the white, after what seemed like an hour. Ranger gave 2 harsh, deliberate barks. Beside a partially buried pine, a figure sagged. Cole staggered over to it and saw the old couple from Elm Street, Mr. and Mrs. Henry. Mrs. Henry was awake but in a trance, holding on to her husband's coat sleeve as though she was scared to release it. Cole's touch caused Mr. Henry's eyes to open. Cole's voice was just loud enough to be heard as he inquired, "Can you walk?" Mrs. Henry stumbled. "We'll try," she said. Ranger steadied her by pressing his warm body against her legs. Cole tied a rope around each of their waists and assisted them in standing up. He took them back to the arch, one slow step at a time. Behind him, the ranger led the line. Cole let out a sigh of relief as the steel ribs outline appeared through the snow like a shadow. Lantern light and warmth flowed across the floor inside. As Cole led the pair inside, the families let out a gasp. With grateful eyes, Emily rushed over with blankets. Ranger barked again before Cole could catch his breath. Once, then twice. There are more out there. Cole kept his coat on all the time. I'm going back with Ranger. Emily took hold of his sleeve. Please, Cole. You have icy skin. You're exerting too much effort. I won't abandon anyone else, he answered plainly. Ranger walked next to him, determined. With humiliation still weighing heavily on his face, Caleb took a step forward. Allow me to arrive. I am able to assist. Cole responded, not in a cruel way, but honestly, you'll slow us down. Remain here. Don't worry about the others. And again, he and Ranger strode directly into the storm. Next, they discovered Luke, the Jenkins youngster, partially buried next to an overturned snowmobile. He was awake, his teeth chattering fiercely as he struggled to maintain consciousness despite the injury to his leg. Cole grunted as the boy's weight moved with the breeze as he raised him in his arms. When the trail turned toward a drift that was too deep to climb, Ranger stayed close and gave Cole a gentle prod. Cole's legs trembled with fatigue by the time they reached the arch again. The frost coated Rurs's fur. Inside, the families applauded feebly, their gratitude indescribable. With tears in her eyes, Emily greeted them at the door. You're saving lives, Cole. Are you aware of that? Cole remained silent. He was unable to. Not quite yet. Too many people were still in need of shelter. He and Ranger searched for hours until the power of the storm became too great to handle. Cole finally let himself lie down in the arch. 5 days went by, holding the line between dread and hope for 5 days. The world changed inside the arch. Slowly, what had begun as a single man's refuge developed into a community, a makeshift town, and a place that had a sense of life. Cole set up stations in the same manner that he had done in times of crisis abroad. There is a protected entrance, a food space, a sleeping area, a section for injuries, and warmth zones close to the firewood stacks. The dominion of rears. Children made small snow creatures out of slush, brought in on boots, while they played quietly close to the wood piles. As the cold crept in, Ranger embraced them and became their protector. When his nose touched their faces, they giggled gently and buried their hands in his fur. Mrs. Lamy used an improvised skillet to prepare biscuits. After bandaging his leg, the Jenkins boy showed the younger ones card tricks. Thomas Grady gave the terrified family something familiar to cling to by sharing old tales about the origins of Timberline Valley. Cole felt needed for the first time in years. Not frightened, not shunned. Needed. On the third evening, when he was checking the insulation around the stove again, Emily came up to him. Ranger was sleeping close by, his feet moving in a dream. You're doing all this, Emily remarked quietly. Cole gave a headshake. No, we're doing it together. You've given them hope, she continued. The comments unnerved him. Look at them, Cole. They're calmer because they believe in you. He had no idea how to be taken seriously. For the first time since the storm started, the wind died down on the 4th day. Over the bridge a brittle hush descended. Everyone stopped and listened. Cole went out into the opening of the shell. Under a chilly sun, the valley below sparkled white. Drifts of snow rose like icebergs. Splintered pieces of wood were sticking out of the snow where many roofs had completely fallen. Under the drifts, once beautiful houses had changed into unidentifiable shapes. Caleb shifted next to him, his expression serious. The entire town is that. Cole gave a slow nod. Everything was taken by the ridge. Caleb touched the steel arch and whispered, "Except this. You built the only thing that's still standing, Cole." Cole just stared out over the valley, unsure of how to react. Under the storm, a cemetery of fences, rooftops, and memories. Behind him. With a reassuring growl, Ranger rubbed against his leg. Emily approached with a clipboard of notes on injuries and supplies. "We can hold out another week if we ration well." Cole smiled. There was no other option. "We'll make it work." Because they had to. Ranger rested his head on Cole's boot as he sat on the cabin stairs on the 6th day when candles flickered and people crowded close for warmth. Snow floated softly through openings close to the entryway, propelled by the storm's final murmurs. Cole surveyed the arch. The families are taking a break. A sprain is being treated by Emily. Caleb is mending ripped blankets for other people. Kids dozing off next to Ria's. Without opening his eyes, Ranger thumped his tail and he muttered, "We did it, boy." Fear became survival after 5 days in the arch, and survival became something more profound. It had transformed Cole's wild concept into the valley's final hope, and united strangers into a community. The storm eventually gave up on the 6th morning. Northcliffe Ridge was enveloped in a dense, unnatural calm as its roar subsided to a ghostly whisper. The world beyond the arch was covered in a dazzling layer of white, pristine, unspoiled, and eerily still. As usual, Cole woke up before dawn, but the silence made him uneasy. Ranger also saw it. With its nose up toward the frigid air coming in through the arch's entrance and its ears twitching, the dog paced once around the cabin door. "It's over," Cole whispered. Yet somehow, it didn't feel like victory. Families slowly rose from their blankets. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes. Caleb and his wife started a small pot of oatmeal near one of the portable stoves. Emily prepared her medical kit, expecting frostbite checks and wound dressings. Lanterns flickered to life one by one, but all eyes drifted toward the arch opening, toward the ridge, toward the world the storm had reshaped. Cole tightened his coat and stepped outside into the arched corridor of steel. Ranger followed instantly, pawing lightly at the snow near the entrance. Together, they walked into the pale dawn. The sight hit Cole like a physical blow. Timberline Valley, his valley now, lay crushed beneath mountains of snow. Homes he recognized instantly were reduced to lumpy shapes. Their rooftops caved in like crushed cardboard. The entire eastern side of the town looked flattened. Smoke still rose from the burned ruins of the supply barn, its black streak cutting violently across the white horizon. Cole inhaled shakily. Lord. Ranger pressed against his leg, sensing the heaviness of the moment. Footsteps crunched behind them. Caleb stood in the arch, face pale and eyes glazed with shock. Soon, more families gathered beside him, staring at the devastation below. "My God," Emily whispered. Mrs. Henry began to weep quietly. Her husband wrapped an arm around her shoulders as she buried her face into his coat. The storm had not damaged the valley. It had destroyed it. Caleb swallowed hard. "If we'd stayed in town," Cole finished softly, "you wouldn't have made it." Caleb nodded, tears gathering in his eyes despite the cold. Ranger gave a soft whine and nudged his hand. As daylight strengthened, Cole led a few of the adults a short distance down the ridge to survey damage from a safer vantage point. The snowdrifts towered higher than trucks. Entire streets vanished beneath the storm's fury. Timberline Valley looked as though it had been swallowed by the mountain itself. Henry Lawson's hardware store had collapsed completely. The school roof had sheared in two. The boarding house was gone. Even the church steeple had been snapped off like a matchstick. Emily covered her mouth, her breath hitching. "We have nowhere to go back to, not until we dig it out," Vince muttered. But we can't dig it out now. Caleb shook his head in response. Cole felt the weight of the statement. Half the valley is trapped inside their homes or under them. He was familiar with this sensation. Accountability. Burdensome. Demanding. And inevitable. He looked around the gathering. This is where we begin. We make trails along the ridge. Where we can, we dig. Help will arrive once the roads are free. Caleb gave a nod. We'll do as you say. Cole tensed. I'm not in command. Emily took a step closer, her gaze steely but warm. Here you are. Cole averted his uneasy gaze. Although he had previously led through chaos and fire, he had no desire to do it again. Not after the events of his previous command, but Ranger pushed him once again, more forcefully this time, reminding him of what they had endured together. Cole inhaled deeply. After assessing injuries, we ration supplies and make plans. Nearly all of the families nodded at once. After a few hours, when they had become accustomed to taking care of each other, Cole started looking for damage on the arch. He anticipated denting or buckling, yet the framework held up well. None of the panels had shifted. The cabin was dry, insulated, and safe since the snow had slid off precisely as planned. Henry approached from behind and gazed at the steel with a renewed sense of reverence. Henry continued softly, Cole, you could have made a fortune. You could have taken that design anywhere. Cole didn't raise his head. That's not why I built it. Henry said in a husky voice, No. You created it for survival, and as a result you saved us all. Cole stopped, holding a wrench. Cole swallowed hard as Henry went on. People are alive right now because you didn't listen to us. Because you kept going, receiving praise wasn't pleasant. It didn't. It was like touching an unhealed bruise. Thank Ranger, muttered Cole at last. Ranger lifted his head from where two young children were using him as a pillow at the sound of his name, beating his tail once before falling back to sleep. He's the reason I kept my head straight. Henry gave a small smile. We'll thank him too. As day turned into dusk, the families gathered around the central stove inside the arch. Lanterns cast warm golden light across their tired but hopeful faces. Children leaned against their parents. Caleb and Vince repaired damaged coats. Emily stitched a wound on a neighbor's arm with careful hands. And for the first time since the storm began, laughter, quiet, uncertain, but real, echoed inside the steel walls. Cole sat on the cabin steps, exhausted, watching the community take shape around him. Ranger rested at his feet, chin on his paws, eyelids heavy, but watching everything. Emily walked over and crouched beside Cole. They're alive because of you. Cole shook his head slowly. They're alive because we work together. Cole, Emily said softly. Look at them. Really, look. You've given them hope. Cole met her gaze for a brief moment before looking away, uncomfortable with the weight of her words. He whispered to Ranger, We did something good here, boy. Ranger answered with a soft, thudding tail. Then, as Cole lifted his eyes toward the valley, broken, battered, but still standing beneath the snow, he felt something he hadn't felt in many years. A quiet, profound sense of purpose. The storm had taken Timberline Valley apart, but it had revealed something stronger in the pieces left behind. And Cole Harrison, the man the town once mocked, now stood at the heart of its survival. Tomorrow recovery would begin, and nothing in the valley would ever be the same. The storm's final traces melted slowly over the following weeks, revealing a valley reshaped by nature's fury. What once stood as a quiet, tight-knit mountain town was now a scattered mosaic of ruined rooftops, splintered beams, and snow-packed memories. But within that devastation, something unexpected grew. Cooperation, unity, and a gratitude so profound it softened even the hardest hearts. And at the center of it all stood the arch, Cole's arch, the one they had mocked, the one that saved them. As the weather cleared and roads reopened, the state's emergency crews arrived. The sight of 27 people emerging healthy from beneath a steel shell stunned them. Reporters came too, scribbling notes, snapping photos, and asking Cole to explain how he'd built the only structure on North Cliff Ridge that survived untouched. Cole kept his answers simple. "It's just engineering," he'd say. "The arch takes the wind. The snow falls from the arch." The valley knew it was more than just engineering, but the cabin remained safe inside. When the mountain attempted to tear everything apart, a man they had discarded as broken held the line. Which is why the arch had stood, because Cole had stood and Ranger kept watch. Recovery was well under progress by spring. Houses were rebuilt by families. One by one, individuals ascended the ridge once roads were dug out and supplies were restocked. Nor to belittle, nor to question, but to gain knowledge. One afternoon, hat in hand, Caleb said, "Cole, for my family, I would like to construct a shelter similar to yours. I want them to be secure." After examining him for a while, Cole nodded. "And me," Vince continued, "I'll teach you." "And me," said Henry. "Us too," the Jenkins kid called as his leg began to mend. Cole soon found himself distributing measuring tapes, creating schematics on scrap plywood, and instructing the villagers on how to bend steel, secure foundations, and comprehend wind patterns. In a manner that no one had done since he left the army, they actually listened to him. Additionally, instructing didn't feel like giving commands for the first time. It was like giving someone a reason. Ranger adapted to the new commotion around the ridge with ease. The dog roamed around from employee to employee, checking their equipment, nudges when they dropped anything, and curls up at their feet when they were taking a break. Youngsters treated him as a mountain guardian ghost and followed him everywhere. Slowly, the valley changed. 12 new arch shelters were up and running within a year. All were constructed under Cole's supervision, some bigger than his. Tourists paused to gaze at the odd but stunning steel giants shining in the sunlight as they passed through Timberline Valley. They were formally designated Harrison Arch Shelters by the state. The valley urged, but Cole flinched at the name. "You saved lives with your innovation. Names should go with the truth," Emily advised him. Cole didn't dispute. Not with her. Life sank into something stable and comfortable. Cole constructed a second stove for gatherings with others and remodeled his porch under the arch. Emily frequently paid him a visit, sometimes bringing books she thought he would like, and other times stew. Almost every day the kids climbed the ridge to play with Ranger. Then, on a cool fall morning, Cole saw that Ranger had failed to arrive to welcome him. He discovered the dog curled up in his normal location, happily resting next to the cabin entrance. Rare's fur, which was formerly brown, turned a soft gold as the sun rose. Cole knelt next to him and put a soft touch on his back. Ranger remained motionless, without raising his head or thumping his tail. Cole felt the silence more forcefully than any storm ever could. He lowered his head and took a long breath, allowing the sorrow to flow through him like a springtime river. Ranger had accompanied him through winter storms, combat zones, and deserts and mountains. He had faithfully saved an entire village, slept next to Cole on lonely nights in Timberline Valley, and hauled Cole out the wreckage at Helmand. He had loved, protected, and observed. An hour later, Emily discovered Cole still sitting next to Rosa's body. She placed a hand on his arm and knelt beside him in silence. There was no need for words. That afternoon, the valley came together. Every family who made it through the storm arrived to the ridge. As Cole buried Ranger at the arch's entrance, even those who were still rebuilding took a break from their work to ascend Northcliffe and join him, the location where the devoted dog had watched over everyone. It was a plain grave, an artisanal wooden marker. Carefully, 3 lines were burned into the grain. He stood watch, Ranger. A real soldier. The wind blew gently across the arch's ribs as Cole took a step back. This time, it's not harsh or mocking, almost kind, like a salute. A hand was placed on Cole's shoulder by Henry. Our entire valley was rescued by your dog. Cole nodded, tears in his eyes. I was first saved by him. The valley entered a new age in the years that followed. The art shelters first appeared in nearby counties before spreading over the entire state. Mountain families, miners and ranchers constructed their own variations. Cole's design has made it safer, smarter, and stronger. Cole imparted all of his knowledge to scores of apprentices without expecting anything in return. Reporters arrived and left. Papers were written by engineers. Contracts were offered by state officials. Cole declined courteously. He had no desire for wealth. He had no desire for stardom. He desired for the world to withstand the storms a bit more firmly. Additionally, he wished for Rear's legacy to reside in each shelter constructed to safeguard the weak. Inside the arch he constructed with his own bloodied hands, Cole Harrison grew old. His walk slowed, and his hair became gray. But the cottage stayed warm, and the people he saved stayed near. Many years later, the valley honored him with a procession that traveled from Timberline to Northcliffe Ridge when his time finally arrived. They carried him under the arch that had saved their lives, walking the same route Cole had once taken on his own. They buried him next to Ranger while church bells, restored from ruin, reverberated around the valley. A valley was sculpted by 2 guardians, 2 troops, and 2 lives. Timberline Ridge continues to draw tourists who stand beneath the rusting steel shell and run their hands over the icy metal that once contained the most powerful storm the valley has ever seen. The tale of the guy who constructed a shelter when no one believed him is whispered. They indicate the entrance by pointing to the markers. The armor was built by Cole Harrison. He stood watch, Ranger, and every winter, just as Cole intended, the weathered but unbroken arch discharges its burden and stays steady as the winds pick up and the snow piled thick. The cottage remains toasty inside. People are secure inside. The legacy of a veteran and his devoted dog lives on within. Please leave a brief remark below, even if it's only a 0 or 1. Letting me know if this tale touched you in any way. More people who need a little hope today can hear these stories thanks to your voice. Additionally, be sure to subscribe if you wish to follow more potent journeys like Cole and Ranger's. You have a lot more stories in store for you. Tales of bravery, devotion, and second chances. I'll see you at the next Remain Here.